I have one other topic I want to get to as it relates to the amphibians, and it is that amphibian populations globally are crashing, as you may or may not be aware. And Yellowstone ecosystem is no exception to that. As you may recall, when we talked about amphibians, I mentioned that the northern leopard frog is no longer found in the ecosystem. And it is maybe a casualty of what we see occurring in other parts of the world. So as we look at this global crash of amphibians, at least many species of amphibians, I want to talk about some of the causes here. And there are three major causes, and I'll add in a fourth as well, which is more regional. But one of the global causes is that there's a global pandemic of a chytridiomycota. This is a primitive fungus that we've talked about previously in the course. And so anyway, this chytrid fungus is a parasitic fungus. It infects the skin, and as we've already talked about, that skin is really vascular in the case of amphibia. It's highly permeable, it's highly porous, and anyway, it's susceptible to fungal infestations. And of course, they also live in aquatic, wet environments, and that's an ideal environment for fungi. So we don't really know exactly what the cause is. It is related, or I shouldn't say necessarily related, but it is coincidental to the warming that we've seen, in the late 70s, 80s, and certainly currently. And so there may be a relationship between this pandemic, fungal pandemic, and global warming, but there's no real smoking gun on that. But it certainly exists. So anyway, again, this fungus has been found on all continents, and we're not really sure how it's spread from one place to another, but it's a real problem. So this is a big deal. So it will literally just kill the amphibians outright, certainly in the adult stages. Another problem is that there's also a global pandemic of trematode infestations. And trematodes, you may recall, are flukes. And so there are some species of fluke in which amphibians serve as the intermediate host. And this is particularly problematic for frogs, but it can be a problem for salamanders as well. Anyway, what happens is that in this intermediate, with the frog serving as an intermediate host, it actually infects the tadpoles. And so as the tadpoles absorb the tail and begin to grow large limbs, what's happening is that the fluke parasites are insisting at the base of the spine, and they interfere with nerve growth into the limbs. And as a result, what happens there is that you end up with the deformation of limbs. So when they get to the adult stage, they no longer have the tail, they're breathing, they're having to walk around. They can't coordinate properly, and they'll just starve to death, or they'll be predated upon. So it's not so much that the trematode is killing them as that the trematode is causing these growth deformities, and that's what's killing the frogs. So anyway, so that's kind of unusual. And again, we don't really know, where this trematode came from and why it has spread as much as it has. Also, ozone depletion, it's not ozone so much that's the problem, but the depletion of ozone that's a problem, because it's led to an increase in ultraviolet radiation. So really a third major cause would be an increase in UV radiation. Certainly in some of the northern latitudes, including the northern United States and up into Canada, we are measuring increased amounts of UV radiation, and there's direct evidence that increased UV radiation can kill young tadpoles and eggs. So this is a contributing factor in some ecosystems. I wouldn't say that's a global, necessarily globally always the case, but regionally in some areas, ultraviolet radiation is problematic. And then a fourth factor, which I would say is a regional factor, it would be pesticide contamination, herbicide contamination, just basically chemical contaminations. Again, the skin is very permeable. The biggest problem here again would be pesticides of various types. Some of those persist for quite a while in the environment. They wash into the water. And so even if you have relatively low concentrations of pesticides, they can accumulate in the fatty tissues of frogs and toads and salamanders, and can eventually be lethal. So again, fungal infestation, trematode infestation, increased ultraviolet radiation, and pesticides seem to be wiping out amphibians, and Yellowstone ecosystem is no exception to that.